Chapter 4.29. How Pantagruel sailed by the sneaking island, where Shrovetide reigned. The jovial fleet being refitted and repaired, new stores taken in, the Macrians over and above satisfied and pleased with the money spent there by Pantagruel. Our men in better humor than they used to be, if possible, we merrily put to sea the next day, near sunset, with a delicious fresh gale. Zenomanes showed us afar off the sneaking island, where reigned Shrovetide, of whom Pantagruel had heard much talk formerly. For that reason he would gladly have seen him in person, had not Zenomanes advised him to the contrary. First, because this would have been much out of our way, and then for the lean cheer which he told us was to be found at that prince's court, and indeed all over the island. You can see nothing there for your money, said he, but a huge greedy guts, a tall woundy swallower of hot wardens and mussels, a long-shanked mole-catcher, an overgrown bottler of hay, a mossy-chinned demi-giant with a double-shaven crown of lantern breed, a very great loitering naughty-peaked youngster, banner-bearer to the fish-eating tribe, dictator of mustard land, flogger of little children, calciner of ashes, father and foster-father to physicians, swarming with pardons, indulgences, and stations. A very honest man, a good Catholic, and as brimful of devotion as ever he can hold. He weeps the 3/4 parts of the day, and never assists at any weddings. But give the devil his due, he is the most industrious larding-stick and skewer-maker in 40 kingdoms. About 6 years ago, as I passed by Sneaking Land, I brought home a large skewer from thence, and made a present of it to the butchers of Quand, who set a great value upon them, and that for a cause. Some time or other, if ever we live to come back to our own country, I will show you 2 of them fastened on the great church porch. His usual food is pickled coats of mail, salt helmets and headpieces, and salt sallets, which sometimes makes him piss pins and needles. As for his clothing, 'tis comical enough, conscience, both for make and color. For he wears gray and cold, nothing before and not behind with the sleeves of the same. You will do me a kindness, said Pantagruel, if, as you have described his clothes, food, actions, and pastimes, you will also give me an account of his shape and disposition in all his parts. Prithee do, dear Cod, said Friar John, for I have found him in my breviary, and then follow the movable holy days. With all my heart, answered Zenomanes, we may chance to hear more of him as we touch at the wild island, the dominions of the squab chitterlings, his enemies, against whom he is eternally at odds. And were it not for the help of the noble Carnival, their protector and good neighbor, this meager-looked Loseley Shrovetide would long before this have made sad work among them, and rooted them out of their habitation. Are these same chitlins, said Friar John, male or female, angels or mortals, women or maids? They are, replied Zenomanes, females in sex, mortal in kind, some of them maids, others not. The devil have me, said Friar John, if I bent for them. What a shameful disorder in nature, is it not, to make war against women? Let's go back and hack the villain to pieces. What? Meddle with Shrovetide? Cried Panurge, in the name of Beelzebub, I am not yet so weary of my life. No, I'm not yet so mad as that comes to. Quid juris? Suppose we should find ourselves pent up between the chitlins and Shrovetide, between the anvil and the hammers, shankers and buboes. Stand off. Godzooks, let us make the best of our way. I bid you good night, sweet Mr. Shrovetide. I recommend to you the chitterlings, and pray don't forget the puddings. Chapter 4.3. How Shrovetide is anatomized and described by Zenomanes. As for the inward parts of Shrovetide, said Zenomanes, his brain is, at least, it was in my time in bigness, colors, substance, and strength, much like the left cod of a he-handworm. The ventricles of his said brain, the stomach like a belt, like an auger, the pylorus like a pitchfork, the worm-like excrescence, like the windpipe, like an oyster a Christmas box. Knife, the membranes like amongst the throat, like a pincushion cowl, stuffed with oakum, the funnel like a mason's chisel, the lungs like a prebends the fornix, like a casket, fur gown, the glandula pinnules, like a bag, the heart like a cope, pipe, the mediastine, like an earthen, the reedy mirabile, like a gutter, cup, the dug-like processus, like a the pleura, like a crow's bill, patch, the arteries like a watchcoat, The tympanums like a wheelie the midriff, like a Montero cap. Gig. The liver like a double-tongued the rocky bones, like a goose mattock. Wing. The veins like a sash window. The nape of the neck like a paper the spleen like a catcall. Lantern. The guts like a trammel. The nerves like a pipkin. The gall like a cooper's adze. The uvula like a sackbut. The entrails like a gauntlet. The palate like a mitten. The mesentery like an abbot's the spittle like a shuttle. Miter. The almonds like a telescope. The hungry gut like a button. The bridge of his nose like the blind gut like a breastplate. Wheelbarrow. The colon like a bridle. The head of the larynx like the arse gut like a monk's vintage basket. Leathern bottle. The kidneys like a trowel. The ligaments like a tinker, the loins like a padlock. Budget. The ureters like a pothook. The bones like three-cornered the emulgent veins, like two cheese cakes. Gilliflowers. The marrow like a wallet. The spermatic vessels like the cartilages, like a field cully-mully puff. Tortoise alias a mole. The peristata like an ink pot. The glandules in the mouth like the bladder like a stone bow. A pruning knife. The neck like a mill clapper. The animal spirits like swinging the mirach or lower parts of the fisticuffs. Belly like a high-crowned hat. The blood fermenting like the syphatch or its inner rind, multiplication of flirts on the like a wooden cuff. Nose. The muscles like a pair of bellows. The urine like a fig-pecker. The tendons like a hawking the sperm, like 100 glove. 10-penny nails. And his nurse told me that being married to mid-Lent, he only begot a good number of local adverbs and certain double fasts. His memory he had like a scarf. His undertakings, like the ballast his common sense, like a buzzing of a galleon. Of bees. His understanding, like a torn his imagination, like the chime breviary. Of a set of bells. His notions, like snails crawling his thoughts, like a flight of star out of strawberries. Lings. His will, like 3 filberts in a his conscience, like the unnest porringer. Ling of a parcel of young his desire, like 6 trusses of hay. Herons. His judgment, like a shoeing his deliberations, like a set of horn. Organs. His discretion, like the truckle of his repentance, like the carriage a pulley. Of a double cannon. His reason, like a cricket. Chapter 4.31. Shrovetide's outward parts anatomized. Shrovetide, continued Xenomanes, is somewhat better proportioned in his outward parts, excepting the 7 ribs which he had over and above the common shape of men. His toes were like a virginal on the peritoneum, or caul wherein an organ. His bowels were wrapped, like his nails like a gimlet. A billiard table. His feet like a guitar. His back like an overgrown rack his heels, like a club. Bent crossbow. The soles of his feet, like a crew the vertebrae or joints of his sibyl. Backbone like a bagpipe. His legs like a hawk's lure. His ribs like a spinning wheel. His knees like a joint stool. His brisket like a canopy. His thighs like a steel cap. His shoulder blades like a mortar. His hips like a wimble. His breast like a game at 9, his belly as big as a ton, buttoned pins. After the old fashion, with a his paps like a hornpipe. Girdle riding over the middle his armpits, like a checker. Of his bosom. His shoulders like a hand barrow. His navel like a cymbal. His arms like a riding hood. His groin like a mince pie. His fingers like a brotherhood's his member, like a slipper. Andirons. His purse like an oil cruet. The fibulae, or lesser bones of his genitals, like a joiner's planer. Legs like a pair of stilts. Their erecting muscles, like a his shin bones like sickles. Racket. His elbows like a mousetrap. The perineum like a flageolet. His hands like a curry comb. His arsehole like a crystal look his neck like a talby. In glass. His throat like a felt to distill hip his bum like a harrow. Pockriz. The knob in his throat like a his loins like a butterpot. Barrel where hanged to his jaws like a caudal cup. Brazen wens, very fine in his teeth like a hunter's staff. harmonious, in the shape of such colt's teeth as his hourglass. You will find one at Collonges his beard, like a lantern. Les Roix in Poitou, and his chin like a mushroom. Two at La Brosse and Zaintonge, his ears like a pair of gloves. On the cellar door. His nose like a buskin. His tongue like a jew's harp. His nostrils like a forehead cloth. His mouth like a horse cloth. His eyebrows like a dripping pan. His face embroidered like a mule's on his left brow was a mark of pack saddle. The shape and bigness of his head contrived like a still. Urinal. His skull like a pouch. His eyelids like a fiddle. The sutury or seams of his skull, his eyes like a comb box. Like the annulus piscatoris, or his optic nerves, like a tinder the fisher's signet. Box. His skin like a gabardine. His forehead like a false cup. His epidermis or outward skin his temples, like the cock of a bolting cloth. Cistern. His hair like a scrubbing brush. His cheeks like a pair of wooden his fur, such as above said. Shoes. Chapter 4.32. A continuation of Shrovetide's countenance. 'Tis a wonderful thing, continued Xenomanes, to hear and see the state of Shrovetide. If he chanced to spit, it was whole when he trembled, it was large baskets full of goldfinches. Venison pasties. If he blowed his nose, it was when he did sweat, it was old pickled grigs. Ling with butter sauce. When he wept, it was ducks with when he belched, it was bushels onion sauce. Of oysters. When he sneezed, it was whole when he muttered, it was lawyers, tubfuls of mustard. Revels. When he coughed, it was boxes when he hopped about, it was of marmalade. Letters of license and protect when he sobbed, it was water tions. Cresses. When he stepped back, it was when he yawned, it was potfuls sea cockle shells. Of pickled peas. When he slabbered, it was calm when he sighed, it was dried mon ovens. Neat's tongues. When he was hoarse, it was in when he whistled, it was a whole entry of Morris dancers. Scuttleful of green apes. When he broke wind, it was done when he snored, it was a whole cow's leather spatterdashes. Panful of fried beans. When he funked, it was washed when he frowned, it was soused leather boots. Hog's feet. When he scratched himself, it when he spoke, it was coarse was new proclamations. Brown russet cloth, so little when he sung, it was peas and it was like crimson silk, with cods. Which Parasates desired that, when he evacuated, it was mush the words of such as spoke to rooms and morals. Her son Cyrus, king of Persia, when he puffed, it was cabbages should be interwoven. With oil alias calls ambalif. When he blowed, it was indulg when he talked, it was the last and se money boxes. Year's snow. When he winked, it was buttered when he dreamt, it was of a buns. Cock in a bull. When he grumbled, it was March when he gave nothing, so much cats. For the bearer. When he nodded, it was iron if he thought to himself, it was bound wagons. Whimsies and maggots. When he made mouths, it was if he dozed, it was leases of lands. Broken staves. What is yet more strange, he used to work doing nothing, and did nothing though he worked. Caroused sleeping, and slept carousing with his eyes open like the hares in our country, for fear of being taken napping by the chitterlings, his inveterate enemies. Biting he laughed and laughing bit, eat nothing fasting and fasted eating nothing. Mumbled upon suspicion, drank by imagination, swam on the tops of high steeples, dried his clothes in ponds and rivers, fished in the air, and there used to catch decuman lobsters, hunted at the bottom of the herring pond, and caught their ibexes, stambucks, chamois, and other wild goats. Used to put out the eyes of all the crows which he took sneakingly. Feared nothing but his own shadow and the cries of fat kids. Used to gad abroad some days like a truant schoolboy. Played with the ropes of bells on festival days of saints. Made a mallet of his fist, and writ on hairy parchment prognostications and almanacs with his huge pin case. Is that the gentleman? Said Friar John. He is my man, this is the very fellow I looked for. I will send him a challenge immediately. This is, said Pantagruel, a strange and monstrous sort of man, if I may call him a man. You put me in mind of the form and looks of Amedunt and Dissonance. How were they made? Said Friar John. May I be peeled like a raw onion, if ever I heard a word of them. I'll tell you what I read of them in some ancient apologues, replied Pantagruel. Physis, that is to say, nature at her first burthen begat beauty and harmony without carnal copulation, being of herself very fruitful and prolific. Antiphysis, who ever was the counterpart of nature, immediately, out of a malicious spite against her for her beautiful and honorable productions, in opposition begot Amydunt and Dissonance by copulation with Telamon. Their heads were round like a football, and not gently flatted on both sides, like the common shape of men. Their ears stood pricked up like those of asses, their eyes, as hard as those of crabs, and without brows, stared out of their heads, fixed on bones like those of our heels. Their feet were round like tennis balls, their arms and hands turned backwards towards their shoulders, and they walked on their heads, continually turning round like a ball, topsy-turvy, heels overhead. Yet as you know that apes esteem their young the handsomest in the world, Antiphysis extolled her offspring, and strove to prove that their shape was handsomer and neater than that of the children of Physis, saying that thus to have spherical heads and feet, and walk in a circular manner, wheeling round, had something in it of the perfection of the divine power, which makes all beings eternally turn in that fashion, and that to have our feet uppermost, and the head below them, was to imitate the Creator of the universe. The hair being like the roots, and the legs like the branches of man. For trees are better planted by their roots than they could be by their branches. By this demonstration, she implied that her children were much more to be praised for being like a standing tree than those of Physis, that made a figure of a tree upside down. As for the arms and hands, she pretended to prove that they were more justly turned towards the shoulders, because that part of the body ought not to be without defense, while the forepart is duly fenced with teeth, which a man cannot only use to chew, but also to defend himself against those things that offend him. Thus, by the testimony and a stipulation of the brute beasts, she drew all the witless herd and mob of fools into her opinion, and was admired by all brainless and nonsensical people. Since that, she begot the hypocritical tribes of eavesdropping dissemblers, superstitious pope-mongers, and priest-ridden bigots, the frantic pistolets, the demoniacal Calvins, impostors of Geneva, the scrapers of benefices, apparitors with the devil in them, and other grinders and squeezers of livings, herb-stinking hermits, gully-gutted dunces of the cowl, church vermin, false zealots, devourers of the substance of men, and many more other deformed and ill-favored monsters. Made in spite of nature. Chapter 4.33. How Pantagruel discovered a monstrous feister, or whirlpool, near the wild island. About sunset, coming near the wild island, Pantagruel spied afar off a huge, monstrous feister, a sort of whale, which some call a whirlpool, that came right upon us, neighing, snorting, raised above the waves higher than our main-tops, and spouting water all the way into the air before itself, like a large river falling from a mountain. Pantagruel showed it to the pilot and to Xenomanes. By the pilot's advice, the trumpets of the Thalange were sounded to warn all the fleet to stand close and look to themselves. This alarm being given, all the ships, galleons, frigates, brigantines, according to their naval discipline, placed themselves in the order and figure of an Y, upsilon, the letter of Pythagoras, as cranes do in their flight, and like an acute angle, in whose cone and basis the Thalange placed herself ready to fight smartly. Friar John, with the grenadiers, got on the forecastle. Poor Panurge began to cry and howl worse than ever. "Babble, baboo," said he, shrugging up his shoulders, quivering all over with fear, "there will be the devil upon done. This is a worse business than that t'other day. Let us fly, let us fly. Old Nick take me if it is not Leviathan, described by the noble prophet Moses in the life of patient Job. It will swallow us all, ships and men, shag, rag, and bobtail, like a dose of pills. Alas! It will make no more of us, and we shall hold no more room in its hellish jaws than a sugar plum in an ass's throat. Look, look, tease upon us, let us wheel off, whip it away, and get ashore. I believe 'tis the very individual sea monster that was formerly designed to devour Andromeda. We are all undone. Oh! For some valiant Perseus, here now to kill the dog. I'll do its business presently, said Pantagruel, fear nothing. Odds belly, said Panurge, remove the cause of my fear then. When the devil would you have a man be afraid, but when there is so much cause? If your destiny be such as Friar John was saying a while ago, replied Pantagruel, You ought to be afraid of Pyroes, Eos, Ethon, and Phlegon, the sun's coach horses, that breathe fire at the nostrils, and not of Feisters, that spout nothing but water at the snout and mouth. Their water will not endanger your life, and that element will rather save and preserve than hurt or endanger you. I trust to that, and hang me, quoth Panurge. Yours is a very pretty fancy. Odds fish! Did I not give you a sufficient account of the elements, transmutation, and the blunders that are made of roast for boiled, and boiled for roast? Alas! Here 'tis, I'll go hide myself below. We are dead men, every mother's son of us. I see upon our maintop that merciless hag Atropos, with her scissors new ground, ready to cut our threads all at one snip. Oh, how dreadful and abominable thou art! Thou hast drowned a good many beside us, who never made their brags of it. Did it but spout good, brisk, dainty, delicious white wine, instead of this damned bitter salt water, one might better bear with it, and there would be some cause to be patient. Like that English lord, who being doomed to die, and had leave to choose what kind of death he would, chose to be drowned in a butt of Malmsey. Here it is. Ozo. Devil. Sathanas. Leviathan. I cannot abide to look upon thee, thou art so abominably ugly. Go to the bar, go take the pettifoggers. Chapter 4.34. How the monstrous Pfeister was slain by Pantagruel. The Pfeister, coming between the ships and the galleons, threw water by whole tons upon them, as if it had been the cataracts of the Nile in Ethiopia. On the other side, arrows, darts, glaives, javelins, spears, harping irons, and partisans flew upon it like hail. Friar John did not spare himself in it. Panurge was half dead for fear. The artillery roared and thundered like mad, and seemed to gall it in good earnest, but did but little good. For the great iron and brass cannon shot entering its skin seemed to melt like tiles in the sun. Pantagruel then, considering the weight and exigency of the matter, stretched out his arms and showed what he could do. You tell us, and it is recorded, that Commutus, the Roman emperor, could shoot with a bow so dexterously that at a good distance he would let fly an arrow through a child's fingers and never touch them. You also tell us of an Indian archer, who lived when Alexander the Great conquered India, and was so skillful in drawing the bow that at a considerable distance he would shoot his arrows through a ring, though they were 3 cubits long, and their irons so large and weighty that with them he used to pierce steel cutlasses, thick shields, steel breastplates, and generally what he did hit, how firm, resisting, hard, and strong soever it were. You also tell us wonders of the industry of the ancient Franks, who were preferred to all others in point of archery, and when they hunted either black or dun beasts, used to rub the head of their arrows with hellebore, because the flesh of the venison struck with such an arrow was more tender, dainty, wholesome, and delicious bearing off, nevertheless, the part that was touched round about. You also talk of the Parthians, who used to shoot backwards more dexterously than other nations forwards, and also celebrate the skill of the Scythians in that art, who sent once to Darius, king of Persia, an ambassador that made him a present of a bird, a frog, a mouse, and 5 arrows without speaking one word, and being asked what those presents meant, and if he had commission to say anything, answered that he had not. Which puzzled and gravelled Darius very much, till Gabrias, one of the 7 captains that had killed the Magi, explained it, saying to Darius, by these gifts and offerings the Scythians silently tell you that except the Persians like birds fly up to heaven, or like mice hide themselves near the center of the earth, or like frogs dive to the very bottom of ponds and lakes, they shall be destroyed by the power and arrows of the Scythians. The noble Pantagruel was, without comparison, more admirable yet in the art of shooting and darting. For with his dreadful piles and darts, nearly resembling the huge beams that support the bridges of Nantes, Saumur, Bergerac, and at Paris the millers, and the changers' bridges in length, size, weight, and ironwork, he at a mile's distance would open an oyster and never touch the edges. He would snuff a candle without putting it out, would shoot a magpie in the eye. Take off a boot's undersole, or a riding hood's lining, without soiling them a bit. Turn over every leaf of Friar John's breviary, one after another, and not tear one. With such darts, of which there was good store in the ship, at the first blow he ran the Pfeister in at the forehead so furiously that he pierced both its jaws and tongue. So that from that time to this it no more opened its guttural trapdoor, nor drew and spouted water. At the second blow, he put out its right eye, and at the third, its left. And we had all the pleasure to see the feister bearing those 3 horns in its forehead, somewhat leaning forwards in an equilateral triangle. Meanwhile it turned about to and fro, staggering and straying like one stunned, blinded, and taking his leave of the world. Pantagruel, not satisfied with this, let fly another dart, which took the monster under the tail likewise sloping. Then with 3 other on the chine, in a perpendicular line, divided its flank from the tail to the snout at an equal distance. Then he larded it with 50 on one side, and after that, to make even work, he darted as many on its other side, so that the body of the feister seemed like the hulk of a galleon with 3 masts, joined by a competent dimension of its beams, as if they had been the ribs and chainwales of the keel, which was a pleasant sight. The feister then giving up the ghost, turned itself upon its back, as all dead fishes do, and being thus overturned, with the beams and darts upside down in the sea, it seemed a scolopendra or centipede, as that serpent is described by the ancient sage Nicander. Chapter 4.35 How Pantagruel went on shore in the wild island, the ancient abode of the chitterlings. The boat's crew of the ship Lantern towed the feister ashore on the neighboring shore, which happened to be the wild island, to make an anatomical dissection of its body, and save the fat of its kidneys, which, they said, was very useful and necessary for the cure of a certain distemper, which they called want of money. As for Pantagruel, he took no manner of notice of the monster, for he had seen many such, nay, bigger, in the Gallic Ocean. Yet he condescended to land in the wild island, to dry and refresh some of his men, whom the feister had wetted and bedaubed, at a small desert seaport towards the south, seated near a fine pleasant grove, out of which flowed a delicious brook of fresh, clear, and purling water. Here they pitched their tents and set up their kitchens, nor did they spare fuel. Everyone having shifted as they thought fit, Friar John rang the bell, and the cloth was immediately laid, and supper brought in. Pantagruel eating cheerfully with his men, much about the second course perceived certain little sly chitlins clambering up a high tree near the pantry, as still as so many mice. Which made him ask Zenomanes what kind of creatures these were, taking them for squirrels, weasels, martins, or ermines. They are chitterlings, replied Zenomanes. This is the wild island of which I spoke to you this morning. There hath been an irreconcilable war this long time between them and Shrovetide, their malicious and ancient enemy. I believe that the noise of the guns which we fired at the feister hath alarmed them, and made them fear their enemy was come with his forces to surprise them, or lay the island waste, as he hath often attempted to do. Though he still came off but bluely, by reason of the care and vigilance of the chitterlings, who, as Dido said to Aeneas's companions that would have landed at Carthage without her leave or knowledge, were forced to watch and stand upon their guard, considering the malice of their enemy and the neighborhood of his territories. Pray, dear friend, said Pantagruel, if you find that by some honest means we may bring this war to an end, and reconcile them together, give me notice of it. I will use my endeavors in it with all my heart, and spare nothing on my side to moderate and accommodate the points in dispute between both parties. That's impossible at this time, answered Zenomanes. About 4 years ago, passing incognito by this country, I endeavored to make a peace, or at least a long truce among them, and I had certainly brought them to be good friends and neighbors if both one and the other parties would have yielded to one single article. Shrovetide would not include in the treaty of peace the wild puddings nor the Highland sausages, their ancient gossips and confederates. The chitlins demanded that the fort of Cax might be under their government, as is the castle of Sulawar, and that a parcel of I don't know what stinking villains, murderers, robbers that held it then should be expelled. But they could not agree in this, and the terms that were offered seemed too hard to either party. So the treaty broke off, and nothing was done. Nevertheless, they became less severe and gentler enemies than they were before. But since the denunciation of the National Council of Chesil, whereby they were roughly handled, hampered, and cited, whereby also Shrovetide was declared filthy, beshitten, and bewrayed in case he made any league or agreement with them, they are grown wonderfully inveterate, incensed, and obstinate against one another, and there is no way to remedy it. You might sooner reconcile cats and rats, or hounds and hares together. Chapter 4.36. How the wild chitlins laid an ambuscado for Pantagruel. While Zenomanes was saying this, Friar John spied 20 or 30 young slender-shaped chitlins posting as fast as they could towards their town, citadel, castle, and fort of chimney, and said to Pantagruel, "I smell a rat. There will be here the devil upon 2 sticks, or I am much out." These worshipful chitlins may chance to mistake you for Shrovetide, though you are not a bit like him. Let us once in our lives leave our junketing for a while, and put ourselves in a posture to give a bellyful of fighting, if they would be at that sport. There can be no false Latin in this, said Zenomanes. Chitlins are still chitlins, always double-hearted and treacherous. Pantagruel then arose from table to visit and scour the thicket, and returned presently, having discovered on the left an ambuscade of squab chitterlings, and on the right, about half a league from thence, a large body of huge giant-like armed chitlins ranged in battalia along a little hill, and marching furiously towards us at the sound of bagpipes, sheep's paunches, and bladders, the merry fifes and drums, trumpets, and clarions, hoping to catch us as Moss caught his mare. By the conjecture of 78 standards which we told, we guessed their number to be 2 and 40,000, at a modest computation. Their order, proud gait, and resolute looks made us judge that they were none of your raw, paltry links, but old warlike chitlins and sausages. From the foremost ranks to the colors, they were all armed capapi with small arms, as we reckoned them at a distance, yet very sharp and case-hardened. Their right and left wings were lined with a great number of forest puddings, heavy patapans, and horse sausages, all of them tall and proper islanders, banditti, and wild. Pantagruel was very much daunted, and not without cause, though Epistemon told him that it might be the use and custom of the Chitterlingonians to welcome and receive thus in arms their foreign friends, as the noble kings of France are received and saluted at their first coming into the chief cities of the kingdom after their advancement to the crown. Perhaps, said he, it may be the usual guard of the queen of the place, who, having notice given her by the junior chitlins of the forlorn hope whom you saw on the tree, of the arrival of your fine and pompous fleet, hath judged that it was without doubt some rich and potent prince, and is come to visit you in person. Pantagruel, little trusting to this, called a council, to have their advice at large in this doubtful case. He briefly showed them how this way of reception with arms had often, under color of compliment and friendship, been fatal. Thus, said he, the Emperor Antonius Caracalla at one time destroyed the citizens of Alexandria, and at another time cut off the attendants of Artabanus, king of Persia, under color of marrying his daughter, which, by the way, did not pass unpunished, for a while after this cost him his life. Thus Jacob's children destroyed the Sychemites, to revenge the rape of their sister Dinah. By such another hypocritical trick Gallienus, the Roman emperor, put to death the military men in Constantinople. Thus, under color of friendship, Antonius enticed Artavasdes, king of Armenia, then, having caused him to be bound in heavy chains and shackled, at last put him to death. We find 1,000 such instances in history, and King Charles VI is justly commended for his prudence to this day, in that, coming back victorious over the Genters and other Flemings to his good city of Paris, and when he came to Birgit, a league from thence, hearing that the citizens with their mallets whence they got the name of Mailitins were marched out of town in battalia, 20,000 strong, he would not go into the town till they had laid down their arms and retired to their respective homes. Though they protested to him that they had taken arms with no other design than to receive him with the greater demonstration of honor and respect. Chapter 4.37. How Pantagruel sent for Colonel Malchitterling and Colonel Cut Pudding, with a discourse well worth your hearing about the names of places and persons. The resolution of the council was that, let things be how they would, it behoved the Pantagruelists to stand upon their guard. Therefore Carpelin and Gymnast were ordered by Pantagruel to go for the soldiers that were on board the Cup Galley, under the command of Colonel Malchitterling, and those on board the Vinetub frigate, under the command of Colonel Cut Pudding the Younger. I will ease Gymnast of that trouble, said Panurge, who wanted to be upon the run. You may have occasion for him here. By this worthy frock of mine, Quoth Friar John, "Thou hast a mind to slip thy neck out of the collar and absent thyself from the fight, thou white-livered son of a dunghill. Upon my virginity, thou wilt never come back. Well, there can be no great loss in thee, for thou wouldst do nothing here but howl, bray, weep, and dishearten the good soldiers." "I will certainly come back," said Panurge, "Friar John, my ghostly father, and speedily too. Do but take care that these plaguy chitlins do not board our ships. All the while you will be a-fighting, I will pray heartily for your victory, after the example of the valiant captain and guide of the people of Israel, Moses." Having said this, he wheeled off. Then said Epistemon to Pantagruel, "The denomination of these two colonels of yours, Mull Chitterling and Cut Pudding, promiseth us assurance, success, and victory, if those chitlins should chance to set upon us." "You take it rightly," said Pantagruel, "and it pleaseth me to see you foresee and prognosticate our victory by the names of our colonels. This way of foretelling by names is not new. It was in old times celebrated and religiously observed by the Pythagoreans. Several great princes and emperors have formerly made good use of it. Octavianus Augustus, second emperor of the Romans, meeting on a day a country fellow named Eutychus, that is, fortunate driving an ass named Nican, that is, in Greek, Victorian, moved by the signification of the asses and ass drivers' names, remained assured of all prosperity and victory. The Emperor Vespasian being once all alone at prayers in the temple of Serapis, at the sight and unexpected coming of a certain servant of his named Basilides, that is, royal, whom he had left sick a great way behind, took hopes and assurance of obtaining the empire of the Romans. Regilian was chosen emperor by the soldiers for no other reason but the signification of his name. See the Cratylus of the divine Plato. "By my thirst, I will read it," said Rhizotome. "I hear you so often quote it. See how the Pythagoreans, by reason of the names and numbers, conclude that Patroclus was to fall by the hand of Hector, Hector by Achilles, Achilles by Paris, Paris by Philoctetes. I am quite lost in my understanding when I reflect upon the admirable invention of Pythagoras, who by the number, either even or odd, of the syllables of every name, would tell you of what side a man was lame, hunchbacked, blind, gouty, troubled with the palsy, pleurisy, or any other distemper incident to humankind, allotting even numbers to the left, mot you reads even numbers to the right, and odd ones to the left, and odd ones to the right side of the body. Indeed," said Epistemon, "I saw this way of syllabizing tried at Zaints at a general procession, in the presence of that good, virtuous, learned, and just president, Brian Valley, Lord of Dowhate. When there went by a man or woman that was either lame, blind of one eye, or humpbacked, he had an account brought him of his or her name. And if the syllables of the name were of an odd number, immediately, without seeing the persons, he declared them to be deformed, blind, lame, or crooked of the right side, and of the left if they were even in number, and such indeed we ever found them. By this syllabical invention," said Pantagruel, "the learned have affirmed that Achilles kneeling was wounded by the arrow of Paris in the right heel, for his name is of odd syllables. Here we ought to observe that the ancients used to kneel the right foot, and that Venus was also wounded before Troy in the left hand, for her name in Greek is Aphrodite, of 4 syllables. Vulcan lamed of his left foot for the same reason, Philip, king of Macedon, and Hannibal, blind of the right eye. Not to speak of sciaticas, broken bellies, and hemicranias, which may be distinguished by this Pythagorean reason. But returning to names, do but consider how Alexander the Great, son of King Philip, of whom we spoke just now, compassed his undertaking merely by the interpretation of a name. He had besieged the strong city of Tyre, and for several weeks battered it with all his power, but all in vain. His engines and attempts were still baffled by the Tyrians, which made him finally resolve to raise the siege, to his great grief, foreseeing the great stain which such a shameful retreat would be to his reputation. In this anxiety and agitation of mind, he fell asleep and dreamed that a satyr was come into his tent, capering, skipping, and tripping it up and down with his goatish hoofs, and that he strove to lay hold on him. But the satyr still slipped from him, till at last, having penned him up into a corner, he took him. With this he awoke, and telling his dream to the philosophers and sages of his court, they let him know that it was a promise of victory from the gods, and that he should soon be master of Tyre. the word satiros divided in two being sa tyros, and signifying Tyre is thine. And in truth, at the next onset, he took the town by storm, and by a complete victory reduced that stubborn people to subjection. On the other hand, see how, by the signification of one word, Pompey fell into despair. Being overcome by Caesar at the battle of Pharsalia, he had no other way left to escape but by flight, which attempting by sea, he arrived near the island of Cyprus, and perceived on the shore near the city of Paphos a beautiful and stately palace. Now asking the pilot what was the name of it, he told him that it was called Cacobasilia, that is, evil king, which struck such a dread and terror in him that he fell into despair, as being assured of losing shortly his life. Insomuch that his complaints, sighs, and groans were heard by the mariners and other passengers. And indeed, a while after, a certain strange peasant, called Achilles, cut off his head. To all these examples might be added, what happened to 50. Paulus Emilius, when the Senate elected him imperator, that is, chief of the army which they sent against Perses, king of Macedon. That evening returning home to prepare for his expedition, and kissing a little daughter of his called Traja, she seemed somewhat sad to him. "What is the matter?" said he, "my chicken? Why is my Traja thus sad and melancholy?" "Daddy," replied the child, "Persa is dead." This was the name of a little bitch, which she loved mightily. Hearing this, Paulus took assurance of a victory over Perses. If time would permit us to discourse of the sacred Hebrew writ, we might find 100 noted passages evidently showing how religiously they observed proper names and their significations. He had hardly ended this discourse, when the two colonels arrived with their soldiers, all well armed and resolute. Pantagruel made them a short speech, entreating them to behave themselves bravely in case they were attacked, for he could not yet believe that the chitlins were so treacherous. But he bade them by no means to give the first offense, giving them carnival for the watchword. Chapter 4.38 How Chitlins Are Not to be Slighted by Men. You shake your empty noddles now, jolly topers, and do not believe what tell you here, any more than if it were some tale of a tub. Well, well, cannot help it. Believe it if you will, if you won't, let it alone. For my part, I very well know what I say. It was in the wild island, in our voyage to the holy bottle. I tell you the time and place, what would you have more? I would have you call to mind the strength of the ancient giants that undertook to lay the high mountain Pelion on the top of Ossa, and set among those the shady Olympus, to dash out the gods' brains, unnestle them, and scour their heavenly lodgings. Theirs was no small strength, you may well think, and yet they were nothing but chitterlings from the waist downwards, or at least serpents, not to tell a lie for the matter. The serpent that tempted Eve, too, was of the chitterling kind, and yet it is recorded of him that he was more subtle than any beast of the field. Even so are chitlins. Nay, to this very hour they hold in some universities that this same tempter was the chitterling called Ithyphalus, into which was transformed body Priapus, arch-seducer of females in paradise, that is, a garden in Greek. Pray now tell me who can tell but that the Swiss, now so bold and warlike, were formerly chitlins. For my part, I would not take my oath to the contrary. The Himantoppodes, a nation very famous in Ethiopia, according to Pliny's description, are chitlins and nothing else. If all this will not satisfy your worships or remove your incredulity, I would have you forthwith, I mean drinking first, that nothing be done rashly. Visit Lusignan, Parthenay, Voint, Mervent, and Ponzages in Poitou. There you will find a cloud of witnesses, not of your affidavit men of the right stamp, but credible time out of mind, that will take their corporal oath on Rigom's knucklebone, that Melusina their founder or foundress, which you please, was woman from the head to the prick purse, and thence downwards was a serpentine chitterling, or if you'll have it otherwise, a chitterlingized serpent. She nevertheless had a genteel and noble gait, imitated to this very day by your hop merchants of Brittany, in their pass-by and country dances. What do you think was the cause of Erychthonius's being the first inventor of coaches, litters, and chariots? Nothing but because Vulcan had begot him with chitterlingized legs, which to hide he chose to ride in a litter, rather than on horseback, for chitlins were not yet in esteem at that time. The Scythian nymph, Aura, was likewise half woman and half chitterling, and yet seemed so beautiful to Jupiter that nothing could serve him, but he must give her a touch of his godship's kindness. And accordingly he had a brave boy by her, called Calaxes. And therefore I would have you leave off shaking your empty noddles at this, as if it were a story, and firmly believe that nothing is truer than the gospel. Chapter 4.39. How Friar John joined with the cooks to fight the chitlins. Friar John, seeing these furious chitlins thus boldly march up, said to Pantagruel, "Here will be a rare battle of hobby horses, a pretty kind of puppet show fight, for aught I see. Oh, what mighty honor and wonderful glory will attend our victory! I would have you only be a bare spectator of this fight, and for anything else leave me and my men to deal with them." "What men?" said Pantagruel. "Matter of breviary," replied Friar John. "How came Potiphar, who was head cook of Pharaoh's kitchens, he that bought Joseph, and whom the said Joseph might have made a cuckold if he had not been a Joseph? How came he, I say, to be made general of all the horse in the kingdom of Egypt? Why was Nebuzaradan, King Nebuchadnezzar's head cook, chosen to the exclusion of all other captains to besiege and destroy Jerusalem?" "I hear you," replied Pantagruel. "By St. Christopher's whiskers," said Friar John, "I dare lay a wager that it was because they had formerly engaged chitlins, or men as little valued, whom to rout, conquer, and destroy, cooks are without comparison more fit than cuirassiers and gendarmes armed at all points, or all the horse and foot in the world." "You put me in mind," said Pantagruel, "of what is written amongst the facetious and merry sayings of Cicero. During the more than civil wars between Caesar and Pompey, though he was much courted by the first, he naturally leaned more to the side of the latter. Now one day, hearing that the Pompeians in a certain rencontre had lost a great many men, he took a fancy to visit their camp. There he perceived little strength, less courage, but much disorder. From that time, foreseeing that things would go ill with them, as it since happened, he began to banter now one and then another, and be very free of his cutting jests. So some of Pompey's captains, playing the good fellows to show their assurance, told him, "Do you see how many eagles we have yet? They were then the device of the Romans in war. They might be of use to you," replied Cicero, "if you had to do with magpies." "Thus, seeing we are to fight chitlins," pursued Pantagruel, "you infer thence that it is a culinary war, and have a mind to join with the cooks. Well, do as you please. I'll stay here in the meantime, and wait for the event of the rumpus." Friar John went that very moment among the sutlers, into the cooks' tents, and told them in a pleasing manner, "I must see you crowned with honor and triumph this day, my lads. To your arms are reserved such achievements as never yet were performed within the memory of man. Odds belly, do they make nothing of the valiant cooks? Let us go fight yonder fornicating chitterlings. I'll be your captain. But first let's drink, boys. Come on. Let us be of good cheer. Noble captain," returned the kitchen tribe, "this was spoken like yourself, bravely offered. Huzzah! We are all at your excellency's command, and we live and die by you." "Live, live," said Friar John, "a god's name, but die by no means. That is the chitlins' lot, they shall have their belly full of it. Come on then, let us put ourselves in order, Nebuzaradan's the word." Chapter 4.4. How Friar John fitted up the sow, and of the valiant cooks that went into it. Then, by Friar John's order, the engineers and their workmen fitted up the great sow that was in the ship-leathern bottle. It was a wonderful machine, so contrived that, by means of large engines that were round about it in rows, it throwed forked iron bars and four-squared steel bolts, and in its hold 200 men at least could easily fight and be sheltered. It was made after the model of the sow of Riol, by the means of which Bergerac was retaken from the English in the reign of Charles VI. Here are the names of the noble and valiant cooks who went into the sow, as the Greeks did into the Trojan horse. Sour sauce, crisp pig, carbonado, sweetmeat, greasy slouch, sop and pan, greedy gut, fat gut, pig fowl, licorice chops, bray mortar, mustard pot, souse pork, lick sauce, hog's haslet, slap sauce, hog's foot, chopped fizz, cog broth, hodgepodge, gallimaufry, slip-slip. All these noble cooks in their coat of arms did bear, in a field gules, a larding pin vert, charged with a chevron argent. Lard hogslard, pinch lard, snatch lard, nibble lard, top lard, nullard, filch lard, pick lard, scrape lard, fat lard, save lard, chew lard, Gaillard by syncope, born near Rabelais. The said culinary doctor's name was Gaillard lard, in the same manner as you used to say idolatrous for idolatress. Stiff lard, cut lard, waste lard, watch lard, mince lard, oga lard, sweet lard, dainty lard, whey lard, eat lard, fresh lard, gulch lard, snap lard, rusty lard, eye lard, catch lard, names unknown among the Marians and Jews. Balaki, thirsty, porridge pot, pig salad, kitchen stuff, lick dish, broil rasher, vergis, salt gullet, coney skin, save dripping, snail dresser, dainty chops, watercress, soup monger, pyrite, scrape turnip, brewy's belly, pudding pan, trivet, chine picker, toss bot, monsieur ragout, suck gravy, mustard sauce, crack tipkin, macaroon, claret sauce, scrape pot, skewer maker, swill broth, smell smock. He was afterwards taken from the kitchen and removed to chamber practice for the service of the noble cardinal hunt venison. Raw roast, hog's gullet, voxtail, dish clout, sirloin, fly flap, save suet, spit mutton, old grizzle, fire fumbler, fritter fryer, rough belly, pillicock, flesh smith, saffron sauce, long tulle, cramgut, strutting tom, prick fried, tuzzy mussy, slashed snout, prick madam, jacket liner, smutty face, prick it, guzzle drink. Mondum that first invented madam's sauce, and for that discovery was thus called in the Scotch-French dialect. Lablally, sloven, trencherman, slabberchops, swallow pitcher, goodman goosecap, scumpot, wafer monger, munch turnip, gully guts, snap gobbet, pudding bag, rin spot, scurvy fizz, pig sticker, drink spiller. Robert. He invented Robert sauce, so good and necessary for roasted canais, ducks, fresh pork, poached eggs, salt fish, and 1,000 other such dishes. Coldeel, frying pan, big snout, thornback, man of dough, lick finger, gurnard, saw's doctor, tidbit, grumbling gut, waste butter, saw's box, alms scrip, shit breech, all fours, taste all, sick brawn, whim, scrap merchant, tom teddy, baste roast, belly timberman, moldy crust, gaping hoyden, hashy, hasty, calf's bluck, frig palate, red herring, leather breeches, powdering tub, cheesecake. All these noble cooks went into the sow, merry, cheery, hale, brisk old dogs at mischief, and ready to fight stoutly. Friar John ever and anon waving his huge scimitar, brought up the rear, and double-locked the doors on the inside. Chapter 4.41 How Pantagruel broke the chitlins at the knees. The chitlins advanced so near that Pantagruel perceived that they stretched their arms and already began to charge their lances, which caused him to send gymnasts to know what they meant, and why they thus, without the least provocation, came to fall upon their old trusty friends, who had neither said nor done the least ill thing to them. Gymnast, being advanced near their front, bowed very low and said to them as loud as ever he could, "We are friends, we are friends, all of us your friends, yours, and at your command. We are for Carnival, your old confederate." Some have since told me that he mistook, and said cavernal instead of carnival. Whatever it was, the word was no sooner out of his mouth, but a huge little squab sausage, starting out of the front of their main body, would have griped him by the collar. "By the helmet of Mars," said Gymnast, "I will swallow thee, but thou shalt only come in chips and slices, for big as thou art, thou couldst never come in whole." This spoke, he lugs out his trusty sword, "'Kis mine arse," so he called it with both his fists, and cut the sausage in twain. Bless me, how fat the foul thief was. It puts me in mind of the huge bull of Bern, that was slain at Marignan, when the drunken Swiss were so mauled there. Believe me, it had little less than 4 inches, lard on its paunch. The sausage's job being done, a crowd of others flew upon Gymnast, and had most scurvily dragged him down when Pantagruel with his men came up to his relief. Then began the martial fray, higgledy-piggledy. Moll Chitterling did maul chitlins, Cut Pudding did cut puddings, Pantagruel did break the chitlins at the knees. Friar John played at least in sight within his sow, viewing and observing all things, when the patapans that lay in ambuscade most furiously sallied out upon Pantagruel. Friar John, who lay snug all this while, by that time perceiving the rout and hurlyburly, set open the doors of his sow and sallied out with his merry Greeks, some of them armed with iron spits, others with andirons, racks, fire shovels, frying pans, kettles, gridirons, oven forks, tongs, dripping pans, brooms, iron pots, mortars, pestles, all in battle array, like so many housebreakers, hallooing and roaring out altogether most frightfully, "Nabuzardin, Nabuzardin, Nabuzardin." Thus shouting and hooting they fought like dragons, and charged through the patapans and sausages. The chitlins, perceiving this fresh reinforcement, and that the others would be too hard for M, betook themselves to their heels, scampering off with full speed, as if the devil had come for them. Friar John, with an iron crow, knocked them down as fast as hops. His men, too, were not sparing on their side. Oh, what a woeful sight it was! The field was all over strewed with heaps of dead or wounded chitlins, and history relates that had not heaven had a hand in it, the chitterling tribe had been totally rooted out of the world by the culinary champions. But there happened a wonderful thing. You may believe as little or as much of it as you please. From the north flew towards us a huge, fat, thick, grisly swine, with long and large wings like those of a windmill, its plumes red-crimson like those of a phenicopter, which in Languedoc they call flamen. Its eyes were red and flaming like a carbuncle, its ears green like a prassen emerald, its teeth like a topaz, its tail long and black like jet. Its feet white, diaphanous and transparent like a diamond, somewhat broad, and of the splay kind, like those of geese, and as Queen Dix used to be at Toulouse in the days of yore. About its neck it wore a gold collar, round which were some Ionian characters, whereof I could pick out but 2 words, USATHENAN, hog-teaching Minerva. The sky was clear before, but at that monster's appearance it changed so mightily for the worse that we were all amazed at it. As soon as the chitterlings perceived the flying hog, down they all threw their weapons and fell on their knees, lifting up their hands joined together, without speaking one word, in a posture of adoration. Friar John and his party kept on mincing, felling, braining, mangling, and spitting the chitterlings like mad. But Pantagruel sounded a retreat, and all hostility ceased. The monster having several times hovered backwards and forwards between the 2 armies, with a tail shot voided above 27 butts of mustard on the ground, then flew away through the air, crying all the while, "Carnival, Carnival, Carnival." Chapter 4.42. How Pantagruel held a treaty with Niflizeth, Queen of the Chitlins. The monster being out of sight, and the 2 armies remaining silent, Pantagruel demanded a parley with the Lady Niflizeth, Queen of the Chitterlings, who was in her chariot by the standards, and it was easily granted. The queen alighted, courteously received Pantagruel, and was glad to see him. Pantagruel complained to her of this breach of peace, but she civilly made her excuse, telling him that a false information had caused all this mischief, her spies having brought her word that Shrovetide, their mortal foe, was landed, and spent his time in examining the urine of feisters. She therefore entreated him to pardon them their offense, telling him that reverence was sooner found in chitlins than gall, and offering, for herself and all her successors, to hold of him and his the whole island and country, to obey him in all his commands, be friends to his friends, and foes to his foes, and also to send every year, as an acknowledgment of their homage, a tribute of 78,000 royal chitlins to serve him at his first course at table 6 months in the year. Which was punctually performed. For the next day she sent the aforesaid quantity of royal chitlins to the good Gargantua, under the conduct of young Niflizeth, infanta of the island. The good Gargantua made a present of them to the great king of Paris. But by change of air, and for want of mustard, the natural balsam and restorer of chitlins, most of them died. By the great king's particular grant, they were buried in heaps in a part of Paris to this day called La Rue Pavie d'Andouilles, the street paved with chitlins. At the request of the ladies at his court, young Niflizeth was preserved, honorably used, and since that married to heart's content, and was the mother of many children, for which heaven be praised. Pantagruel civilly thanked the queen, forgave all offenses, refused the offer she had made of her country, and gave her a pretty little knife. After that, he asked several nice questions concerning the apparition of that flying hog. She answered that it was the idea of Carnival, their tutelary god in time of war, first founder and original of all the chitterling race, for which reason he resembled a hog, for chitterlings drew their extraction from hogs. Pantagruel asking to what purpose and curative indication he had voided so much mustard on the earth, the queen replied that mustard was their sank-real and celestial balsam, of which, laying but a little in the wounds of the fallen chitlins, in a very short time the wounded were healed and the dead restored to life. Pantagruel held no further discourse with the queen, but retired a shipboard. The like did all the boon companions, with their implements of destruction and their huge sow. Chapter 4.43 How Pantagruel went into the island of Ruech. 2 days after we arrived at the island of Ruech, and I swear to you, by the celestial hen and chickens, that I found the way of living of the people so strange and wonderful that I can't, for the heart's blood of me, half tell it you. They live on nothing but wind, eat nothing but wind, and drink nothing but wind. They have no other houses but weathercocks. They sow no other seeds but the 3 sorts of wind flowers, rue, and herbs that may make one break wind to the purpose. These scour them off carefully. The common sort of people to feed themselves make use of feather, paper, or linen fans, according to their abilities. As for the rich, they live by the means of windmills. When they would have some noble treat, the tables are spread under 1 or 2 windmills. There they feast as merry as beggars, and during the meal their whole talk is commonly of the goodness, excellency, salubrity, and rarity of winds, as you, jolly topers, in your cups philosophize and argue upon wines. The one praises the southeast, the other the southwest, this the west and by south, and this the east and by north, another the west, and another the east, and so of the rest. As for lovers and amorous sparks, no gale for them like a smock gale. For the sick they use bellows, as we use clysters among us. Oh, said to me a little diminutive swollen bubble, that I had now but a bladderful of that same Languedoc wind which they call Circe. The famous physician, Scurin, passing one day by this country, was telling us that it is so strong that it will make nothing of overturning a loaded wagon. Oh, what good would it not do my Oedipodic leg? The biggest are not the best, but, said Panurge, rather would I had here a large bud of that same good Languedoc wine that grows at Meyervaux, Cantoperdrix, and Frontignan. I saw a good likely sort of a man there, much resembling Ventrose, tearing and fuming in a grievous fret with a tall burly groom and a pimping little page of his, laying them on, like the devil, with a buskin. Not knowing the cause of his anger, at first I thought that all this was by the doctor's advice, as being a thing very healthy to the master to be in a passion, and to his man to be banged for it. But at last I heard him taxing his man with stealing from him, like a rogue as he was, the better half of a large leathern bag of an excellent southerly wind, which he had carefully laid up, like a hidden reserve, against the cold weather. They neither exonerate, dung, piss, nor spit in that island, but to make amends they belch, fizzle, funk, and give tail shots in abundance. They are troubled with all manner of distempers, and, indeed, all distempers are engendered and proceed from ventosities, as Hippocrates demonstrates lib. De flatibus. But the most epidemical among them is the wind colic. The remedies which they use are large clysters, whereby they void store of windiness. They all die of dropsies and tympanies, the men farting and the women fizzling, so that their soul takes her leave at the back door. Some time after, walking in the island, we met 3 harebrained airy fellows who seemed mightily puffed up, and went to take their pastime and view the plovers, who live on the same diet as themselves and abound in the island. I observed that, as your true topers when they travel carry flasks, leathern bottles, and small runlets along with them, so each of them had at his girdle a pretty little pair of bellows. If they happened to want wind, by the help of those pretty bellows they immediately drew some, fresh and cool, by attraction and reciprocal expulsion. For, as you well know, wind essentially defined is nothing but fluctuating and agitated air. A while after, we were commanded, in the king's name, not to receive for 3 hours any man or woman of the country on board our ships, some having stolen from him a rousing fart, of the very individual wind which old Goodman Aeolus, the snorer, gave Ulysses to conduct his ship whenever it should happen to be becalmed. Which fart the king kept religiously, like another Sancreal, and performed a world of wonderful cures with it in many dangerous diseases, letting loose and distributing to the patient only as much of it as might frame a virginal fart. Which is, if you must know, what our sanctimonials, alias nuns, in their dialect call ringing backwards. Chapter 4.44. How small rain lays a high wind. Pantagruel commended their government and way of living, and said to their Hypponemian mayor, "If you approve Epicurus's opinion, placing the summum bonum in pleasure, I mean pleasure that's easy and free from toil, I esteem you happy, for your food being wind costs you little or nothing, since you need but blow." "True, sir," returned the mayor, "but alas, nothing is perfect here below. For too often when we are at table, feeding on some good blessed wind of God as on celestial manna, merry as so many friars, down drops on a sudden some small rain, which lays our wind, and so robs us of it. Thus many a meal, lost for want of meat." "Just so," quoth Panurge, "Genin Tosspot of Quinquinies, evacuating some wine of his own burning on his wife's posteriors, laid the ill-fumed wind that blowed out of their centre as out of some magisterial eolipal. Here is a kind of a whim on that subject, which I made formerly. One evening, when Tosspot had been at his butts, and Joan his fat spouse crammed with turnips her guts together they pigged, nor did drink so besought him, but he did what was done when his daddy begot him. Now when to recruit he'd fain have been snoring, Joan's back door was filthily puffing and roaring. So for spite he bepissed her, and quickly did find that a very small rain lays a very high wind. We are also plagued yearly with a very great calamity, cried the mayor. For a giant called Wide Nostrils, who lives in the island of Tohu, comes hither every spring to purge, by the advice of his physicians, and swallows us, like so many pills, a great number of windmills and of bellows also, at which his mouth waters exceedingly. Now this is a sad mortification to us here, who are fain to fast over 3 or 4 whole Lents every year for this, besides certain petty Lents, ember weeks, and other orison and starving tides. And have you no remedy for this?" asked Pantagruel. "By the advice of our Mezarims," replied the mayor, "about the time that he uses to give us a visit, we garrison our windmills with good store of cocks and hens. The first time that the greedy thief swallowed them, they had like to have done his business at once, for they crowed and cackled in his maw, and fluttered up and down athwart and along in his stomach, which threw the glutton into a lipothymy cardiac passion and dreadful and dangerous convulsions, as if some serpent, creeping in at his mouth, had been frisking in his stomach. Here is a comparative as altogether incongruous and impertinent," cried Friar John, interrupting them. "For I have formerly heard that if a serpent chance to get into a man's stomach, it will not do him the least hurt, but will immediately get out if you do but hang the patient by the heels and lay a panful of warm milk near his mouth." "You were told this," said Pantagruel, and so were those who gave you this account. But none ever saw or read of such a cure. On the contrary, Hippocrates, in his 5th book of Epidem, writes that such a case happening in his time, the patient presently died of a spasm and convulsion. Besides the cocks and hens, said the mayor, continuing his story, all the foxes in the country whipped into Wide Nostril's mouth, posting after the poultry, which made such a stir with Reynard at their heels that he grievously fell into fits each minute of an hour. At last, by the advice of a Baden enchanter, at the time of the paroxysm, he used to flay a fox by way of antidote and counterpoison. Since that he took better advice, and eases himself with taking a clyster made with a decoction of wheat and barley corns, and of livers of goslings, to the first of which the poultry run, and the foxes to the latter. Besides, he swallows some of your badgers or foxdogs by the way of pills and boluses. This is our misfortune. Cease to fear, good people, cried Pantagruel. This huge Wide Nostrils, this same swallower of windmills, is no more, I will assure you. He died, being stifled and choked with a lump of fresh butter at the mouth of a hot oven, by the advice of his physicians. Chapter 4.45 How Pantagruel went ashore in the island of Pope Figland. The next morning we arrived at the island of Pope Figs, formerly a rich and free people, called the Gaillardites, but now, alas, miserably poor and under the yoke of the Papimen. The occasion of it was this. On a certain yearly high holiday, the burgomaster, syndics, and topping rabbis of the Gaillardites chanced to go into the neighboring island Papimony to see the festival and pass away the time. Now one of them having espied the Pope's picture, with the sight of which, according to a laudable custom, the people were blessed on high-offering holidays, made mouths at it, and cried, a fig for it, as a sign of manifest contempt and derision. To be revenged of this affront, the Papimen, some days after, without giving the others the least warning, took arms and surprised, destroyed, and ruined the whole island of the Gaillardites, putting the men to the sword and sparing none but the women and children, and those too only on condition to do what the inhabitants of Milan were condemned to by the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. These had rebelled against him in his absence, and ignominiously turned the Empress out of the city, mounting her a horseback on a mule called Thacker, with her breech foremost towards the old jaded mule's head, and her face turned towards the crupper. Now Frederick being returned, mastered them, and caused so careful a search to be made that he found out and got the famous mule Thacker. Then the hangman by his order clapped a fig into the mule's gimcrack, in the presence of the enslaved cits that were brought into the middle of the great marketplace, and proclaimed in the emperor's name, with trumpets, that whosoever of them would save his own life should publicly pull the fig out with his teeth, and after that, put it in again in the very individual cranny whence he had drawed it without using his hands, and that whoever refused to do this should presently swing for it and die in his shoes. Some sturdy fools, standing upon their punctilio, chose honorably to be hanged rather than submit to so shameful and abominable a disgrace. And others, less nice in point of ceremony, took heart of grace, and even resolved to have at the fig and a fig fort, rather than make a worse figure with a hempen collar, and die in the air at so short warning. Accordingly, when they had neatly picked out the fig with their teeth from old Thacker's snatch-blatch, they plainly showed it the headsman, saying, Ecco lo fico, behold the fig. By the same ignominy, the rest of these poor distressed Gaillardites saved their bacon, becoming tributaries and slaves, and the name of Pope Figs was given them, because they said, a fig for the Pope's image. Since this, the poor wretches never prospered, but every year the devil was at their doors, and they were plagued with hail, storms, famine, and all manner of woes, as an everlasting punishment for the sin of their ancestors and relations. Perceiving the misery and calamity of that generation, we did not care to go further up into the country, contenting ourselves with going into a little chapel near the haven to take some holy water. It was dilapidated and ruined, wanting also a cover like St. Peter at Rome. When we were in, as we dipped our fingers in the sanctified cistern, we spied in the middle of that holy pickle a fellow muffled up with stoles, all under water, like a diving duck, except the tip of his snout to draw his breath. About him stood 3 priests, true shavelings, clean shorn and polled, who were muttering strange words to the devils out of a conjuring book. Pantagruel was not a little amazed at this, and inquiring what kind of sport these were at, was told that for 3 years last past the plague had so dreadfully raged in the island that the better half of it had been utterly depopulated, and the lands lay fallow and unoccupied. Now, the mortality being over, this same fellow who had crept into the holy tub, having a large piece of ground, chanced to be sowing it with white winter wheat at the very minute of an hour that a kind of a silly sucking devil, who could not yet write or read or hail and thunder, unless it were on parsley or coleworts, and got leave of his master Lucifer to go into this island of Pope Figs, where the devils were very familiar with the men and women, and often went to take their pastime. This same devil being got thither, directed his discourse to the husbandman, and asked him what he was doing. The poor man told him that he was sowing the ground with corn, to help him to subsist the next year. "Aye, but the ground is none of thine, Mr. Plowjobber," cried the devil, "but mine. For since the time that you mocked the Pope, all this land has been prescribed, adjudged, and abandoned to us. However, to sow corn is not my province. Therefore I will give thee leave to sow the field, that is to say, provided we share the profit." "I will," replied the farmer. "I mean," said the devil, "that of what the land shall bear, 2 lots shall be made, one of what shall grow above ground, the other of what shall be covered with earth. The right of choosing belongs to me, for I am a devil of noble and ancient race, thou art a base clown. I therefore choose what shall lie underground, take thou what shall be above. When dost thou reckon to reap, ha?" "About the middle of July," quoth the farmer. "Well," said the devil, "I'll not fail thee then. In the meantime, slave as thou oughtest. Work, clown, work. I am going to tempt to the pleasing sin of whoring the nuns of Dryfart, the sham saints of the Cowl, and the gluttonish crew. I am more than sure of these. They need but meat, and the job is done. True fire and tinder, touch and take, down falls none, and up gets friar." Chapter 4.46. How a junior devil was fooled by a husbandman of Pope Figland. In the middle of July, the devil came to the place aforesaid with all his crew at his heels, a whole choir of the younger fry of hell, and having met the farmer, said to him, "Well, Clodpate, how hast thou done since I went? Thou and I must share the concern." "Aye, master devil," quoth the clown, "it is but reason we should." Then he and his men began to cut and reap the corn, and on the other side, the devil's imps fell to work, grubbing up and pulling out the stubble by the root. The countryman had his corn thrashed, winnowed it, put into sacks, and went with it to market. The same did the devil's servants, and sat them down there by the man to sell their straw. The countryman sold off his corn at a good rate, and with the money filled an old kind of a demi-buskin which was fastened to his girdle. But the devil eschew the devils took. Far from taking hansel, they were flouted and jeered by the country louts. Market being over, quoth the devil to the farmer, "Well, clown, thou hast choused me once, it is thy fault. Chouse me twice, 'twill be mine." "Nay, good sir devil," replied the farmer, "how can I be said to have choused you, since it was your worship that chose first? The truth is that by this trick you thought to cheat me, hoping that nothing would spring out of the earth for my share, and that you should find whole underground the corn which I had sowed, and with it tempt the poor and needy, the close hypocrite, or the covetous griper, thus making them fall into your snares. But troth, you must e'en go to school yet. You are no conjurer, for aught I see. For the corn that was sowed is dead and rotten, its corruption having caused the generation of that which you saw me sell. So you chose the worst, and therefore are cursed in the gospel. Well, talk no more of it, quoth the devil. What canst thou sow our field with for next year? If a man would make the best of it, answered the ploughman, 'twere fit he sow it with radish. Now, cried the devil, thou talkest like an honest fellow bumpkin. Well, sow me good store of radish, I'll see and keep them safe from storms, and will not hail a bit on them. But hark ye me, this time I bespeak for my share what shall be above ground, what's under shall be thine. Drudge on, Luby, drudge on. I am going to tempt heretics. Their souls are dainty victuals when broiled in rashers and well powdered. My lord Lucifer has the griping in the guts. They'll make a dainty warm dish for his honor's maw. When the season of radishes was come, our devil failed not to meet in the field, with a train of rascally underlings, all waiting devils, and finding there the farmer and his men, he began to cut and gather the leaves of the radishes. After him, the farmer with his spade dug up the radishes and clapped them up into pouches. This done, the devil, the farmer, and their gangs hied them to market, and there the farmer presently made good money of his radishes. But the poor devil took nothing. Nay, what was worse, he was made a common laughingstock by the gaping hoydens. I see thou hast played me a scurvy trick, thou villainous fellow, cried the angry devil. At last I am fully resolved even to make an end of the business betwixt thee and myself about the ground, and these shall be the terms. We will clapper-claw each other, and whoever of us two shall first cry hold, shall quit his share of the field, which shall wholly belong to the conqueror. Fix the time for this trial of skill on this day 7 night. Assure thyself that I'll claw thee off like a devil. I was going to tempt your fornicators, bailiffs, perplexers of causes, scriveners, forgers of deeds, two-handed counselors, prevaricating solicitors, and other such vermin. But they were so civil as to send me word by an interpreter that they are all mine already. Besides, our master Lucifer is so cloyed with their souls that he often sends them back to the smutty scullions and slovenly devils of his kitchen, and they scarce go down with them, unless now and then, when they are high-seasoned. Some say there is no breakfast like a student's, no dinner like a lawyer, no afternoon's nuncheon like a vine-dresser, no supper like a tradesman's, no second supper like a serving-wench, and none of these meals equal to a frockified hobgoblin, All this is true enough. Accordingly, at my Lord Lucifer's first course, hobgoblins, alias imps in cowls, are a standing dish. He willingly used to breakfast on students, but alas, I do not know by what ill luck they have of late years joined the Holy Bible to their studies. So the devil a one we can get down among us. And I verily believe that unless the hypocrites of the tribe of Levi help us in it, taking from the enlightened bookmongers their St. Paul, either by threats, revilings, force, violence, fire, and faggot, we shall not be able to hook in any more of them to nibble at below. He dines commonly on counselors, mischief-mongers, multipliers of lawsuits, such as wrest and pervert right and law and grind and fleece the poor. He never fears to want any of these. But who can endure to be wedded to a dish? He said t'other day, at a full chapter, that he had a great mind to eat the soul of one of the fraternity of the cowl that had forgot to speak for himself in his sermon. And he promised double pay and a large pension to anyone that should bring him such a titbit piping hot. We all went hunting after such a rarity, but came home without the prey, for they all admonished the good women to remember their convent. As for afternoon nuncheons, he has left them off since he was so woefully griped with the colic, his fosterers, sutlers, charcoalmen, and boiling cooks having been sadly mauled and peppered off in the northern countries. His high devilship sups very well on tradesmen, usurers, apothecaries' cheats, coiners, and adulterers of wares. Now and then, when he is on the merry pin, his second supper is of serving wenches who, after they have by stealth soaked their faces with their master's good liquor, fill up the vessel with it at second hand, or with other stinking water. Well, drudge on, boor, drudge on. I am going to tempt the students of Trebizond to leave father and mother, forgo forever the established and common rule of living, disclaim and free themselves from obeying their lawful sovereign's edicts, live in absolute liberty, proudly despise everyone, laugh at all mankind, and taking the fine jovial little cap of poetic license, become so many pretty hobgoblins. Chapter 4.47 How the Devil was Deceived by an Old Woman of Pope Figland. The country lob trudged home very much concerned and thoughtful, you may swear, insomuch that his good woman, seeing him thus look moping, weened that something had been stolen from him at market. But when she had heard the cause of his affliction and seen his budget well lined with coin, she bade him be of good cheer, assuring him that he would be never the worse for the scratching bout in question, wishing him only to leave her to manage that business and not trouble his head about it. For she had already contrived how to bring him off cleverly. Let the worst come to the worst, said the husbandman, it will be but a scratch, for I'll yield at the first stroke and quit the field. Quit a fart, replied the wife, he shall have none of the field. Rely upon me and be quiet, let me alone to deal with him. You say he is a pimping little devil, that is enough. I will soon make him give up the field, I will warrant you. Indeed, had he been a great devil, it had been somewhat. The day that we landed in the island happened to be that which the devil had fixed for the combat. Now the countryman having, like a good Catholic, very fairly confessed himself, and received betimes in the morning, by the advice of the vicar had hid himself, all but the snout, in the holy water pot, in the posture in which we found him. And just as they were telling us this story, news came that the old woman had fooled the devil and gained the field. You may not be sorry, perhaps, to hear how this happened. The devil, you must know, came to the poor man's door, and rapping there cried so ho. Ho the house. Ho clodpate. Where art thou? Come out with a vengeance, come out with a wanion, come out and be damned, now for clawing. Then briskly and resolutely entering the house, and not finding the countryman there, he spied his wife lying on the ground, piteously weeping and howling. What is the matter? Ask the devil. Where is he? What does he? Oh, that I knew where he is, replied 65, the wicked rogue, the butcherly dog, the murderer. He has spoiled me, I am undone, I die of what he has done me. How, cried the devil, what is it? I'll tickle him off for you by and by. Alas, cried the old dissembler, he told me, the butcher, the tyrant, the terror of devils told me that he had made a match to scratch with you this day, and to try his claws he did, but just touch me with his little finger here betwixt the legs, and has spoiled me forever. Oh, I am a dead woman, I shall never be myself again, do but see. Nay, and besides, he talked of going to the smith's to have his pounces sharpened and pointed. Alas! You are undone, Mr. Devil. Good sir, scamper quickly, I am sure he won't stay. Save yourself, I beseech you. While she said this, she uncovered herself up to the chin, after the manner in which the Persian women met their children who fled from the fight, and plainly showed her what do ye call them. The frightened devil, seeing the enormous solution of the continuity in all its dimensions, blessed himself, and cried out, Man, Demiurgon, Magira, Electo, Persephone. Slife, catch me here when he comes. I am gone. Esdeath, what a gash. I resign him the field. Having heard the catastrophe of the story, we retired a shipboard, not being willing to stay there any longer. Pantagruel gave to the poor's box of the fabric of the church 18,000 good royals, in commiseration of the poverty of the people and the calamity of the place. Chapter 4.48 How Pantagruel went ashore at the island of Papamony. Having left the desolate island of the Pope Figs, we sailed for the space of a day very fairly and merrily, and made the blessed island of Papamony. As soon as we had dropped anchor in the road, before we had well moored our ship with ground tackle, 4 persons in different garbs rowed towards us in a skiff. One of them was dressed like a monk in his frock draggle-tailed and booted, the other like a falconer with a lure and a long-winged hawk on his fist. The third like a solicitor with a large bag full of informations, subpoenas, breviates, bills, writs, cases, and other implements of pettifogging. The fourth looked like one of your vine barbers about Aucklands, with a jaunty pair of canvas trousers, a dosser, and a pruning knife at his girdle. As soon as the boat had clapped them on board, they all with one voice asked, Have you seen him, good passengers, have you seen him? Who? Asked Pantagruel. You know who, answered they. Who is it? Asked Friar John. Blood and ounds, I'll thrash him thick and threefold. This he said thinking that they inquired after some robber, murderer, or church breaker. Oh, wonderful! Cried the 4, do not you foreign people know the one? Sirs, replied Epistemon, we do not understand those terms. But if you will be pleased to let us know who you mean, we will tell you the truth of the matter without any more ado. We mean, said they, he that is. Did you ever see him? He that is, returned Pantagruel, according to our theological doctrine, is God who said to Moses, I am that I am. We never saw him, nor can he be beheld by mortal eyes. We mean nothing less than that supreme God who rules in heaven, replied they. We mean the God on earth. Did you ever see him? Upon my honor, replied Carpelin, they mean the Pope. I, answered Panurge. Yea, verily, gentlemen, I have seen 3 of them, whose sight has not much bettered me. How? Cried they, our sacred decretals inform us that there never is more than one living. I mean successively, one after the other, returned Panurge. Otherwise I never saw more than one at a time. O thrice and 4 times happy people! Cried they, you are welcome, and more than double welcome. They then kneeled down before us and would have kissed our feet, but we would not suffer it, telling them that should the Pope come thither in his own person, 'tis all they could do to him. No, certainly, answered they, for we have already resolved upon the matter. We would kiss his bare arse without boggling at it, and eke his 2-pounders, for he has a pair of them, the Holy Father that he has. We find it so by our fine decretals, otherwise he could not be Pope. So that, according to our subtle decretaline philosophy, this is a necessary consequence. He is Pope, therefore he has genitories, and should genitories no more be found in the world could no more have a Pope. While they were talking thus, Pantagruel inquired of one of the coxswain's crew who those persons were. He answered that they were the 4 estates of the island, and added that we should be made as welcome as princes, since we had seen the Pope. Panurge, having been acquainted with this by Pantagruel, said to him in his ear, I swear and vow, sir, 'tis even so, he that has patience may compass anything. Seeing the Pope had done us no good, now in the devil's name, 'twill do us a great deal. We then went ashore, and the whole country, men, women, and children, came to meet us as in a solemn procession. Our 4 estates cried out to them with a loud voice, They have seen him. They have seen him. They have seen him. That proclamation being made, all the mob kneeled before us, lifting up their hands towards heaven, and crying, O happy men! O most happy! And this acclamation lasted above a quarter of an hour. Then came the busby of the place, with all his pedagogues, ushers, and schoolboys, whom he magisterially flogged, as they used to whip children in our country formerly when some criminal was hanged, that they might remember it. This displeased Pantagruel, who said to them, Gentlemen, if you do not leave off whipping these poor children, I am gone. The people were amazed, hearing his stentorian voice, and I saw a little hump with long fingers say to the hypodidascal, What, in the name of wonder? Do all those that see the Pope grow as tall as yon huge fellow that threatens us? Ah! How I shall think time long till I have seen him too, that I may grow and look as big. In short, the acclamations were so great that Homnes, so they called their bishop, hastened thither on an unbridled mule with green trappings, attended by his apposts, as they said, and his supposts, or officers bearing crosses, banners, standards, canopies, torches, holy water pots, and sea. He too wanted to kiss our feet, as the good Christian Valfinier did to Pope Clement, saying that one of their hypothetes, that's one of the scavengers, scourers, and commentators of their holy decretals, had written that, in the same manner as the Messiah, so long and so much expected by the Jews, at last appeared among them, so, on some happy day of God, the Pope would come into that island. And that, while they waited for that blessed time, if any who had seen him at Rome or elsewhere chanced to come among them, they should be sure to make much of them, feast them plentifully, and treat them with a great deal of reverence. However, we civilly desired to be excused. Chapter 4.49. How Homnes, Bishop of Papamony, showed us the Urinopit decretals. Homnes then said to us, 'Tis enjoined us by our holy decretals to visit churches first and taverns after. Therefore, not to decline that fine institution, let us go to church. We will afterwards go and feast ourselves. Man of God, quoth Friar John, do you go before, we'll follow you. You spoke in the matter properly, and like a good Christian. 'Tis long since we saw any such. For my part, this rejoices my mind very much, and I verily believe that I shall have the better stomach after it. Well, 'tis a happy thing to meet with good men. Being come near the gate of the church, we spied a huge thick book, gilt and covered all over with precious stones, as rubies, emeralds, diamonds, and pearls more, or at least as valuable as those which Augustus consecrated to Jupiter Capitolinus. This book hanged in the air, being fastened with 2 thick chains of gold to the zoophor of the porch. We looked on it and admired it. As for Pantagruel, he handled it and dandled it and turned it as he pleased, for he could reach it without straining. And he protested that whenever he touched it, he was seized with a pleasant tickling at his fingers, and new life and activity in his arms, and a violent temptation in his mind to beat 1 or 2 sergeants, or such officers, provided they were not of the shaveling kind. Homnes then said to us, the law was formerly given to the Jews by Moses, written by God himself. At Delphos, before the portal of Apollo's temple, this sentence, Gnothiseauton, was found written with a divine hand. And some time after it, ei was also seen, and as divinely written and transmitted from heaven. Cybele's image was brought out of heaven into a field called Pessinunte in Phrygia. So was that of Diana to Taurus, if you will believe Euripides. The oriflamme, or holy standard, was transmitted out of heaven to the noble and most Christian kings of France to fight against the unbelievers. In the reign of Numa Pompilius, second king of the Romans, the famous copper buckler called Ansel was seen to descend from heaven. At Acropolis, near Athens, Minerva's statue formerly fell from the empyreal heaven. In like manner, the sacred decretals which you see were written with the hand of an angel of the cherubim kind. You outlandish people will hardly believe this, I fear. Little enough of conscience, said Panurge. And then, continued Homnes, they were miraculously transmitted to us here from the very heaven of heavens, in the same manner as the river Nile is called feats by Homer, the father of all philosophy, the holy decretals always accepted. Now, because you have seen the Pope, their evangelist and everlasting protector, we will give you leave to see and kiss them on the inside, if you think meet. But then you must fast 3 days before, and canonically confess, nicely and strictly mustering up and inventorizing your sins, great and small, so thick that one single circumstance of them may not escape you, as our holy decretals which you see direct. This will take up some time. Man of God, answered Panurge, we have seen and discrayed decrees, and eke decretals enough o' conscience. Some on paper, other on parchment, fine and gay like any painted paper lantern, some on vellum, some in manuscript, and others in print. So you need not take half these pains to show us these. We'll take the good will for the deed, and thank you as much as if we had. Ay, marry, said Homnes, but you never saw these that are angelically written. Those in your country are only transcripts from ours, as we find it written by one of our old decretaline scholiasts. For me, do not spare me. I do not value the labor, so I may serve you. Do but tell me whether you will be confessed, and fast only 3 short little days of God. As for shriving, answered Panurge, there can be no great harm in't. But this same fasting, master of mine, will hardly down with us at this time, for we have so very much overfasted ourselves at sea that the spiders have spun their cobwebs over our grinders. Do but look on this good Friar John Decentomers. Homnes then courteously demi-clipped him about the neck. Some moss is growing in his throat for want of bestirring and exercising his chaps. He speaks the truth, vouched Friar John. I have so much fasted that I'm almost grown hump-shouldered. Come then, let's go into the church, said Homnes, and pray forgive us if for the present we do not sing you a fine high mass. The hour of midday is past, and after it our sacred decretals forbid us to sing mass, I mean your high and lawful mass. But I'll say a low and dry one for you. I had rather have one moistened with some good Anjou wine, cried Panurge. Fall to your low mass and dispatch. Odds bodykins, quoth Friar John, it frets me to the guts that I must have an empty stomach at this time of day. For, had I eaten a good breakfast and fed like a monk, if he should chance to sing us the requiem aeternam dona eis domine, I had then brought thither bread and wine for the traits passes, those that are gone before. Well, patience pull away and save tide, short and sweet, I pray you, and this for a cause. Chapter 4.5. How Homnes showed us the archetype, or representation of a pope. Mass being mumbled over, Homnes took a huge bundle of keys out of a trunk near the head altar, and put 32 of them into so many keyholes, put back so many springs, then with 14 more mastered so many padlocks, and at last opened an iron window strongly barred above the said altar. This being done, in token of great mystery he covered himself with wet sackcloth, and drawing a curtain of crimson satin, showed us an image daubed over, coarsely enough, to my thinking. Then he touched it with a pretty long stick, and made us all kiss the part of the stick that had touched the image. After this he said unto us, What think you of this image? It is the likeness of a pope, answered Pantagruel. I know it by the triple crown, his furred amice, his rochet, and his slipper. You are in the right, said Homnes. It is the idea of that same good God on earth whose coming we devoutly await, and whom we hope one day to see in this country. O happy, wished for, and much expected day. And happy, most happy you, whose propitious stars have so favored you as to let you see the living and real face of this good God on earth. By the single sight of whose picture we obtain full remission of all the sins which we remember that we have committed, as also a third part and 18 quarantaines of the sins which we have forgot. And indeed, we only see it on high annual holidays. This caused Pantagruel to say that it was a work like those which Daedalus used to make, since, though it were deformed and ill drawn, nevertheless some divine energy, in point of pardons, lay hid and concealed in it. Thus, said Friar John, at Sewell, the rascally beggars being one evening on a solemn holiday at supper in the Spittal, one bragged of having got 6 blancs, or 2d halfpenny, another 8 liards, or 2d, a third 7 carolesses, or 6d, but an old mumper made his vaunts of having got 3 testins, or 5 shillings. Ah, but, cried his comrades, thou hast a leg of God. As if, continued Friar John, some divine virtue could lie hid in a stinking ulcerated rotten shank. Pray, said Pantagruel, when you are for telling us some such nauseous tale, be so kind as not to forget to provide a basin, Friar John. I'll assure you, I had much ado to forbear bringing up my breakfast. Fie! I wonder a man of your coat is not ashamed to use thus the sacred name of God in speaking of things so filthy and abominable. Fie, I say. If among your monking tribes such an abuse of words is allowed, I beseech you leave it there, and do not let it come out of the cloisters. Physicians, said Epistemon, thus attribute a kind of divinity to some diseases. Nero also extolled mushrooms, and, in a Greek proverb, termed them divine food, because with them he had poisoned Claudius his predecessor. But methinks, gentlemen, this same picture is not over like our late popes. For I have seen them, not with their pallium, amice, or rachidon, but with helmets on their heads, more like the top of a Persian turban. And while the Christian commonwealth was in peace, they alone were most furiously and cruelly making war. This must have been then, returned homines, against the rebellious, heretical Protestants, reprobates who are disobedient to the holiness of this good God on earth. 'Tis not only lawful for him to do so, but it is enjoined him by the sacred decretals. And if any dare transgress one single iota against their commands, whether they be emperors, kings, dukes, princes, or commonwealths, he is immediately to pursue them with fire and sword, strip them of all their goods, take their kingdoms from them, proscribe them, anathematize them, and destroy not only their bodies, those of their children, relations, and others, but damn also their souls to the very bottom of the most hot and burning cauldron in hell. Here, in the devil's name, said Panurge, the people are no heretics, such as was our Ramonagribus, and as they are in Germany and England. You are Christians of the best edition, all picked and culled, for aught I see. Aye, merry are we, returned homines, and for that reason we shall all be saved. Now let us go and bless ourselves with holy water, and then to dinner. Chapter 4.51 Table Talk in Praise of the Decretals. Now, topers, pray observe that while Homnes was saying his dry mass, 3 collectors, or licensed beggars of the church, each of them with a large basin, went round among the people, with a loud voice. Pray remember the blessed men who have seen his face. As we came out of the temple, they brought their basins brimful of papamony chink to Homnes, who told us that it was plentifully to feast with, and that, of this contribution and voluntary tax, one part should be laid out in good drinking, another in good eating, and the remainder in both, according to an admirable exposition hidden in a corner of their holy decretals, which was performed to a T, and that at a noted tavern not much unlike that of Will's ad Amiens. Believe me, we tickled it off there with copious cramming and numerous swilling. I made 2 notable observations at that dinner. The one, that there was not one dish served up, whether of cabritas, capons, hogs, of which latter there is great plenty in papamony, pigeons, conies, leverets, turkeys, or others, without abundance of magistral stuff. The other, that every course, and the fruit also, were served up by unmarried females of the place, tight lasses, I'll assure you, waggish, fair, good-conditioned, and comely, spruce, and fit for business. They were all clad in fine long white albs with 2 girts, their hair interwoven with narrow tape and purple ribbon, stuck with roses, gillyflowers, marjoram, daffodowndilies, thyme, and other sweet flowers. At every cadence they invited us to drink and bang it about, dropping us neat and genteel courtesies. Nor was the sight of them unwelcome to all the company, and as for Friar John, he leered on them sideways, like a cur that steals a capon. When the first course was taken off, the females melodiously sung us an epode in the praise of the sacrosanct decretals, and then the second course being served up, Homnas, joyful and cheery, said to one of the she-butlers, "Light here, clerica." Immediately one of the girls brought him a tall boy brimful of extravagant wine. He took fast hold of it, and fetching a deep sigh, said to Pantagruel, "My lord, and you, my good friends, here's tea with all my heart. You are all very welcome." When he had tipped that off, and given the tall boy to the pretty creature, he lifted up his voice and said, "O most holy decretals, how good is good wine found through your means." "This is the best jest we have had yet," observed Panurge. "But it would still be a better," said Pantagruel, "if they could turn bad wine into good." "O seraphic sextum," continued Homnas, "how necessary are you not to the salvation of poor mortals? O cherubic clementini, how perfectly the perfect institution of a true Christian is contained and described in you. O angelical extravagance, how many poor souls that wander up and down in mortal bodies through this vale of misery would perish were it not for you. When shall this special gift of grace be bestowed on mankind, as to lay aside all other studies and concerns, to use you, to peruse you, to understand you, to know you by heart, to practice you, to incorporate you, to turn you into blood, and incenter you into the deepest ventricles of their brains, the inmost marrow of their bones, and most intricate labyrinth of their arteries? Then, and no sooner than then, nor otherwise than thus, shall the world be happy." While the old man was thus running on, Epistemon rose and softly said to Panurge, "For want of a close stool, I must even leave you for a moment or two. This stuff has unbunged the orifice of my mustard barrel, but I'll not tarry long." Then, continued Homnas, "no hail, frost, ice, snow, overflowing, or vis major, then plenty of all earthly goods here below. Then uninterrupted and eternal peace through the universe, an end of all wars, plunderings, drudgeries, robbing, assassinates, unless it be to destroy these cursed rebels the heretics. Then rejoicing, cheerfulness, jollity, solace, sports, and delicious pleasures, over the face of the earth. What great learning, inestimable erudition, and godlike precepts are knit, linked, riveted, and mortised in the divine chapters of these eternal decretals. How wonderfully, if you read but one demi-canon, short paragraph, or single observation of these sacrosanct decretals, how wonderfully, I say, do you not perceive to kindle in your hearts a furnace of divine love, charity towards your neighbor, provided he be no heretic, bold contempt of all casual and sublunary things, firm content in all your affections, and ecstatic elevation of soul, even to the third heaven. Chapter 4.52. A continuation of the miracles caused by the decretals. "Wisely, brother Timothy," quoth Panurge, didam, he says blue. "But for my part, I believe as little of it as I can. For one day by chance, happened to read a chapter of them at Poictiers, at the most decretilopotent Scotch doctor, S., and old Nick turned me into bumfodder, if this did not make me so hidebound and costive, that for 4 or 5 days I hardly scumbered one poor bud of Sir Reverence. And that, too, was full as dry and hard, I protest, as Catullus tells us were those of his neighbor Furius. Nec toto decies caucas in anno ac id durius est faba, et lapillis, quod tu si manibus terras, fricesque, non unquam digitum inquiner passes." "Ho!" cried Homnas, "byre lady, it may be you were then in the state of mortal sin, my friend." "Well turned," cried Panurge, "this was a new strain agad. One day," said Friar John, "at Sewell, I had applied to my posteriors, by way of hind-towel, a leaf of an old clementiny which our rent-gatherer, John Gimmard, had thrown out into the green of our cloister. Now the devil broil me like a black pudding, if I wasn't so abominably plagued with chaps, chawns, and piles at the fundament, that the orifice of my poor knockandrow was in a most woeful pickle for I don't know how long." "Byre Our Lady," cried Homnas, "it was a plain punishment of God for the sin that you had committed in bewraying that sacred book, which you ought rather to have kissed and adored. I say with an adoration of latria, or of hyperdulia at least. The Panormiton never told a lie in the matter. Saith Panocrates. At Montpelier, John Chouat having bought of the monks of St. Olery a delicate set of decretals, written on fine large parchment of Lambel, to beat gold between the leaves, not so much as a piece that was beaten in them came to good, but all were dilacerated and spoiled. Mark this, cried Homnes, 'twas a divine punishment and vengeance. At Mans, said Eudaemon, Francis Cornu, apothecary, had turned an old set of extravagantes into waste paper. May I never stir if whatever was lapped up in them was not immediately corrupted, rotten, and spoiled. Incense, pepper, cloves, cinnamon, saffron, wax, cassia, rhubarb, tamarinds, all drugs and spices, were lost without exception. Mark, quoth Homnes, an effect of divine justice. This comes of putting the sacred scriptures to such profane uses. At Paris, said Carpelin, Snip Groignit the tailor had turned an old clementiny into patterns and measures, and all the clothes that were cut on them were utterly spoiled and lost. Gowns, hoods, cloaks, cassocks, jerkins, jackets, waistcoats, capes, doublets, petticoats, corps de robes, farthingales, and so forth. Snip, thinking to cut a hood, would cut you out a codpiece. Instead of a cassock, he would make you a high-crowned hat. For a waistcoat, he'd shape you out a rochet. On the pattern of a doublet, he'd make you a thing like a frying pan. Then his journeymen, having stitched it up, did jag it and pink it at the bottom, and so it looked like a pan to fry chestnuts. Instead of a cape, he made a buskin. For a farthingale, he shaped a Montero cap. And thinking to make a cloak, he'd cut out a pair of your big outstrouting Swiss breeches, with panes like the outside of a tabor. Insomuch that Snip was condemned to make good the stuffs to all his customers. And to this day poor Cabbage's hair grows through his hood, and his arse through his pocket holes. Mark, an effect of heavenly wrath and vengeance. Cried Homnes. At Cahusac, said Gymnast, a match being made by the lords of Estasac and Viscount Lawson to shoot at a mark, Perotu had taken to pieces a set of decretals, and set one of the leaves for the white to shoot at. Now I sell, nay, I give and bequeath for ever and aye, the mould of my doublet to 1,500 hampers full of black devils, if ever any archer in the country, though they are singular marksmen in Guienne, could hit the white. Not the least bit of the holy scribble was contaminated or touched. Nay, and Sansorn the elder who held stakes, swore to us, figs duras, hard figs, his greatest oath, that he had openly, visibly, and manifestly seen the bolt of Carquilin moving right to the round circle in the middle of the white. And that just on the point, when it was going to hit and enter, it had gone aside above 7 foot and 4 inches wide of it towards the bakehouse. Miracle! Cried Homnes, miracle! Miracle! Clerica, come wench, light here. Here's to you all, gentlemen, I vow you seem to me very sound Christians. While he said this, the maidens began to snicker at his elbow, grinning, giggling, and twittering among themselves. Friar John began to paw, neigh, and whinny at the snout's end, as one ready to leap, or at least to play the ass, and get up and ride tantivy to the devil like a beggar on horseback. Methinks, said Pantagruel, a man might have been more out of danger near the white of which Gymnast spoke than was formerly Diogenes near another. How is that? Asked Homnes, what was it? Was he one of our decretalists? Rarely fallen in again, egad, said Epistemon, returning from stool. I see he will hook his decretals in, though by the head and shoulders. Diogenes, said Pantagruel, one day for pastime went to see some archers that shot at butts, one of whom was so unskilful, that when it was his turn to shoot all the bystanders went aside, lest he should mistake them for the mark. Diogenes had seen him shoot extremely wide of it. So when the other was taking aim a second time, and the people removed at a great distance to the right and left of the white, he placed himself close by the mark, holding that place to be the safest, and that so bad an archer would certainly rather hit any other. One of the Lord d'Estasac's pages at last found out the charm, pursued Gymnast, and by his advice Perotu put in another white made up of some papers of Pouilac's lawsuit, and then everyone shot cleverly. At Landeraus, said Rhizotome, at John de Liff's wedding were very great doings, as 'twas then the custom of the country. After supper, several farces, interludes, and comical scenes were acted. They had also several morris dancers with bells and tabors, and divers sorts of masks and mummers were let in. My schoolfellows and I, to grace the festival to the best of our power, for fine white and purple liveries had been given to all of us in the morning, contrived a merry mask with store of cockle-shells, shells of snails, periwinkles, and such other. Then for want of cuckoo pint, or priest pintle, lousiber, clote, and paper, we made ourselves false faces with the leaves of an old sextum that had been thrown by and lay there for anyone that would take it up, cutting out holes for the eyes, nose, and mouth. Now, did you ever hear the like since you were born? When we had played our little boyish antic tricks, and came to take off our sham faces, we appeared more hideous and ugly than the little devils that acted the passion at Douai. For our faces were utterly spoiled at the places which had been touched by those leaves. One had there the smallpox, another God's token or the plague spot, a third the crinkums, a fourth the measles, a fifth botches, pushes, and carbuncles. In short, he came off the least hurt who only lost his teeth by the bargain. Miracle! Bawled out Homnes, miracle. Hold, hold! Cried Rhizotome, it is not yet time to clap. My sister Kate and my sister Wren had put the crepines of their hoods, their ruffles, snuffikins, and neckruffs new washed, starched, and ironed, into that very book of decretals. For you must know, it was covered with thick boards and had strong clasps. Now, by the virtue of God hold, interrupted Homnes, what God do you mean? There is but one, answered Rhizotome. In heaven, I grant, replied Homnes, but we have another here on earth, do you see? Ay, marry have we, said Rhizotome, but on my soul I protest I had quite forgot it. Well then, by the virtue of God the Pope, their pinners, neckruffs, bib, coifs, and other linen turned as black as a charcoal man's sack. Miracle! Cried Homnes. Here, Clerica, light me here, and prithee, girl, observe these rare stories. How comes it to pass then, asked Friar John, that people say, ever since decrees had tails, and gendarmes lugged heavy mails, since each monk would have a horse all went here from bad to worse? I understand you, answered Homnes. This is one of the quirks and little satires of the newfangled heretics.